All right. Well, I guess we can get started at 6:01 on my clock. So welcome everyone to this virtual public meeting and workshop to go over the Grindstone Canyon Master Plan. And we wanted to just start with introductions, and I can kick that off. I'm James Fody. I'm an urban planner with Groundwork Studio, and we are a planning and landscape architecture firm based in Albuquerque, but we've been working with the Village of Ruidoso for the last several years on this project and then some other ones as well. And we wanted to kind of introduce our team and then hand it over to Mayor Crawford to welcome everyone as well. So I guess I'll pass it over to you, Will.
Thanks, James. My name is Will Moses. I'm a principal landscape architect here at Groundwork Studio. And I'm really happy to be here tonight to present the work that we've been doing on this project over the last year. And we look forward to hearing from folks. Kelly, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Kelly Fenton. I also work for Groundwork Studio, and I do both planning and landscape design work. And I'm excited about this recreation plan and excited to hear what your concerns and needs are so that we can come up with a great plan to move this forward.
Excellent. And Mayor Crawford, we wanted to invite you if you have some remarks as well and want to introduce yourself.
Sure, James, thank you very much for putting this together tonight. I want to welcome everybody that's attending because this is very important. We want your input, all the questions, and I think Groundwork has done a really good job on answering a lot of the concerns, looking at the overall picture of what the community wants for Grindstone. So we welcome your input. Any questions that you have, no idea is too far out there. And of course, we're going to answer things like parking and trash pickup and all of those things. But I know people have a lot more questions and concerns for the neighborhoods, but we welcome your input. We're glad you're here. So James, you and Will, you guys take it away, and we're looking forward to the presentation.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mayor Crawford. And I guess before we get started, Rodney, do you want to also introduce yourself quickly?
Thank you, James. I'm Rodney Grego, the Village of Ruidoso Parks Director. And again, I echo what the mayor was saying. We really,
are looking forward to participation from the public, and it looks like we have pretty good participation so far. I look forward to seeing the presentation and hearing the feedback from those participating.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Rodney. And so to get started, this is an overview of what we wanted to cover this evening. And we wanted to start out with just an overview of the project and share some of what we've been hearing and learning as we've worked on this master plan over the last 6 months or so. And then we wanted to share some of the results from the Grindstone survey that you may have filled out or seen back in September. We have the results from that survey, and they've kind of informed the plan as we've gone along. And then we wanted to kind of jump in and talk about some of the major themes and issues and possible improvements out at Grindstone that are possible, and then kind of wrap up the evening in the workshop with a period where we would take any questions and comments and other ideas that everyone in the audience might have. So to help us kind of hear from everyone in the audience this evening, we have two main ways that you can kind of participate as we are going along here. The first is if you have ideas or comments or questions, feel free to use the chat function on Zoom, and we'll be able to kind of go back and look at those questions at the end of the presentation and answer them. And if there's questions that we're not able to answer this evening or that come to mind later on, we'll also be able to follow up on the village's website and on our project website and answer any questions you may have. And then we also have some interactive poll questions set up which are, you'll be able to kind of respond to them, and then we'll be able to see the results in real time. So to help us facilitate that, I'm going to add a link here in the chat. And if you click on that or go to the link on the screen, you'll see the questions as they come up. And you can also text responses to the number there at the bottom. So if you text clear sky 950 to 22333, you'll be able to respond to these questions as well. And it's a real number, real link. I know it's kind of funny, but it's legit. So to test that out, we have a little icebreaker question. And we're just wanted to know, among people in the audience, want to know if you're a full-time resident, part-time resident, maybe you live somewhere else. Let's see how this goes here. And give people a few minutes or a few seconds to click the link and answer. Well, we have someone that lives in Ruidoso full time. That's good. Hopefully everyone is able to access the link. Let's see, someone said in the chat. Okay, we're getting a few more results. I might have put the wrong link someone said I might have put the wrong link in the chat here. Well, I think we should move on because we have more things to get to, but we'll try to fix that link. I know it was working earlier. It's probably one of those technical difficulties that comes up in these presentations, but it looks like some folks were able to respond. And I think the purpose of this kind of icebreaker question was to just, see who's in the audience and really just say that we really want to hear from people that are living in Ruidoso or have, a vested interest in Grindstone and in, the success of the village. So moving on, to kind of get into an overview of the project and what we've been working on, I just wanted to share a map of kind of the area. So we've been looking at Grindstone Canyon and Lake. And so it's this area, in the southwest part of the village. And we've been looking at this area that includes Grindstone Lake, but also some of the properties to the east. And the whole area here in the master plan boundaries is about 250 acres. And most of the land is owned by the village of Ruidoso, although there are some private parcels as well. So there's the Grindstone Stables property, which is adjacent to the master plan boundaries. And then there's some private property between the village offices and Grindstone Lake. So we've been kind of looking at this whole area, and this is where the planning, all the plan recommendations that we're putting in the plan are focused. And the reason that this plan is important and having a master plan in the first place is important is because Grindstone Lake really has become a destination in the last few years. It's really transformed from what used to be probably more a quiet spot for locals to go, fish or maybe hike or canoe into a spot where more people are visiting every year. And so that's really transformed the character of the lake in the area. And it's, put Grindstone on the map as one of those places that people are visiting when they visit Ruidoso. And so that's created a number of challenges and also opportunities. And to put that in context of kind of the village and the importance of outdoor recreation overall, these are just some statistics showing the importance of tourism in Ruidoso and in Lincoln County more broadly. And I think it's really interesting to see how, much spending is related to tourism and outdoor rec. So these stats are showing, about $200 million are spent on tourism related spending every year in Lincoln County. And about 25% of the jobs in the county are related to tourism, and outdoor rec is one component of that. And then, it's probably not a surprise to anyone from Ruidoso, but the population of the village, it increases drastically in those summer months when you have, thousands of people visiting. So this is all to say that Grindstone Canyon is now, one of those destinations. It's part of the outdoor rec economy and the tourism economy more broadly. So it's important that the village is planning for the future of the area and making sure that it's a place that people want to visit moving forward. So just to get into a little more background on the project itself, this is an overview of the project timeline. And we started back in February. That's when we had our project kickoff. And we had planned to do a number of public meetings and kind of community events earlier in the year. And then, of course, coronavirus happened, which changed everything. And so we had to cancel our first event, which was going to be Easter weekend. And in the meantime, we've kind of pivoted in the last several months to really focusing on our existing conditions assessment, talking to stakeholders, doing interviews. And then in September, the Village of Ruidoso released the Grindstone survey, which we'll share the results of that in a moment. But, we're here in November now, and this is our first public meeting, and this is kind of our first real opportunity to hear from you all and hear, what's most important for us to include in the plan and kind of the recommendations and ideas that you would want to see prioritized at the site moving forward. So just a plug here, we also have a project website or webpage, which has a little bit more information. And we also have a really cool video of some drone footage that was shot early in the year when the Grindstone Lake was closed. So it just shows how awesome the whole area is, and it's worth checking out. So a little plug for that. And you can also go to the site, and if you have some comments or questions, you can fill it out there as well. All right, so I'll hand it over to Kelly now to talk about the Grindstone survey results.
Thank you, James. The survey was posted online in September to gather feedback from the community, and there were over 1,000 responses, which is a substantial number. So that was really great. When we therefore have high confidence in the results of that survey. Reviewing the results gives us, or helps us understand more about the needs and the desires of the community. And we want to hear more about your ideas for how we can best address your concerns and needs later on in the meeting. But now we'll go through a few of the key findings from the survey and explain how we are using them to develop a plan for Grindstone. We asked people to rate the current offering of recreational activities on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being great and 1 being not so great. About 50% rated the current offerings as either very good or excellent. This finding indicates that there's an opportunity to offer different types of recreation or to make some improvements to the existing types of recreation at Grindstone, or potentially both. And in terms of when people visit, the data show that very few people only visit on weekends or only on weekdays. You see that's about 15 to 17% there. And the most common way in which people visit is both on weekends and on weekdays. So you see that is 43%. This finding is helpful in understanding that there are a lot of people in the community that come to Grindstone Canyon frequently. And this also helps us to develop a plan for parking and circulation improvements for Grindstone. Here are 9 types of recreational activities that happen at Grindstone. Trails, fishing, and passive recreation or wildlife viewing are the most frequently mentioned activity. And so part of our strategy is to figure out ways to manage the parts of the park where these highly popular activities occur. At the same time, being able to offer a wide variety of activities is also important. So we're looking at how to support all of these activities and potentially more, while ensuring that the park is maintained properly in order to support the enjoyment of the lake as well as the environment. And here we see that 85% of people spend a few hours at the park, and 1 in 3 spend about half a day. So this indicates an opportunity to improve park amenities that may support the amount of time people spend at the park. So this could mean providing picnic areas, shaded areas, or trash receptacles. So that's another important aspect of just making sure things are taken care of in the plan. So these are just a few of the findings from the survey, and we appreciate people having taken the time to share with their habits and just taking the time to fill out the survey. And it's important to, as part of us, to develop solutions and a good plan for Grindstone Canyon recreation. And now I'll pass it back to James to discuss some major themes and ideas for improvement.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you, Kelly. And as Kelly said, the survey results have been really helpful in terms of informing, what residents' priorities are. And so we wanted to shift gears now and talk about some of those ideas and major themes that have emerged from the survey results, but also our conversations with residents and stakeholders and with village staff. And then also talk about some of the kind of major improvement ideas and solutions that have come forward so far. So I think the kind of first thing to mention here is just the diversity of users out at Grindstone Lake and in the canyon. Because there's so many different amenities out there, there's a lot of different user groups and people that might have, different interests and needs and be looking for really a different experience. And so these are 6 kind of main user groups that we've identified so far. And, there's overlap between some of these groups, and, might be in one of these groups one weekend and then another one the next. But I think these groups are all kind of, hit on the different experiences that can be had at Grindstone and when you're visiting. So, there's the first group is kind of the regular folks who are visiting fairly frequently, maybe every week or even daily, to, go out to the area and fish or get some exercise and fresh air. Then there's, a lot of families who are visiting the lake and maybe spending a half a day or a whole day just kind of hanging out. Then there's the adventurers who are out there looking to probably go on longer hikes or go on a longer mountain bike ride, and maybe they're visiting to camp or backpack even. There's equestrian users, and then there's folks that are participating in the various competitions that happen at Grindstone and in Ruidoso. So, mountain bike races, disc golf tournaments, all those kind of things. And then, of course, there's a lot of folks visiting from out of town and out of state. And they might overlap in all these groups, but they are, visiting Ruidoso to have an experience and, visit and see everything that the village has to offer, including everything at Grindstone. So with those, different users in mind, it's important to prioritize their needs and kind of balance them as we develop ideas for the master plan. Another thing to point out here is just that, there's a large part of the season or the year where there's not as many activities and events that are happening out at Grindstone. So there's really this 5 to 6 month window where a lot of the activity is concentrated, and that's when most of the people are visiting. And then there's this large off season in the winter months where not as much is happening. So there's a opportunity here to potentially have that be a time where additional programming is offered at Grindstone Lake and in the canyon, including potentially more fishing options or opportunities, or potentially winter events. Okay, so with all that said, I think one of the major challenges that's come up this year and last year, and it's just become more of a challenge every year, is the capacity at the lake. And so because of the number of visitors, it's really become kind of a management challenge to figure out how to support all the people who are visiting, especially on those busy weekends in the summer. So, you know, where do those people park? You know, how do you support just hundreds of people that are visiting and, you know, might be expecting more of a quiet experience, and then, you know, they're there with hundreds of people potentially. How do you balance all those people that are visiting the site is kind of one of those things that we've been looking at. And so, you know, related to that, and one way to manage it is through parking and access. And this is kind of a related challenge of balancing parking, making sure people can park, but without necessarily having the whole area be a huge parking lot, you know. So this first image is of the main parking lot at Grindstone Lake when the site was closed. And I was just amazed when we were visiting back in March or April, and to see how large the parking area is. And of course, this whole area gets filled up on those busy weekends with people in the main lot. And then, you know, in the past, people have parked along the streets leading up to the main parking area, and then they've parked on some of the residential areas, you know, residential roads. And so because the village wants to be a good neighbor, we want to make sure that people have a place to park, that they're not, you know, they're not parking on these side streets and potentially disrupting adjacent property owners, and that there's a long-term solution to manage the number of people visiting the site. So with that, these are some of the kind of main parking solutions that we've discussed with the village and that have come up. The first one, well, I guess the first thing to mention is just that everyone who's accessing the site kind of comes down Grindstone Canyon Road, and then they get on Resort Drive. And so everyone really has to access the site along this major route. So that's created a traffic challenge in its own right. But the main parking solution that's been piloted this year is looking to expand parking into where the current campgrounds are and have that be an overflow parking area. And this was tested out this season. People were able to park in that area if they bought a parking pass using the online reservation system, which we'll talk about a little bit. And so long term, this could become an area where more parking is added, but that would mean potentially turning the campgrounds area into a parking area and potentially like a picnic area instead of a campground site. So that's kind of the solution, to keep parking concentrated where, you know, parking has traditionally been and where the main parking area is. And that would allow easier access to the lake where most people are visiting. The other major solution that we've been looking at is kind of off-site parking. So parking down the road, and then parking up near Wingfield Park where there's some other open parking areas. And these solutions would probably involve, you know, shuttling people to the site, but they would, you know, limit the number of people that are trying to access that kind of main entrance area. So that's another solution that we could look at more. And then quickly just mention that the village has implemented a reservation system, and this was piloted for Grindstone specifically this year for parking passes on those busy weekends. And so this is another operational solution to manage that capacity question by just limiting the number of reservations that can be made. And I think the number of reservations were limited to 300 cars or vehicles on those busy weekends. Okay, so that's overview of capacity and parking. And I quickly wanted to touch on the trail system. Once again, there's a number of different trail users that are accessing the large trail system in the area. There's people that are out there for exercise and kind of shorter hikes. There's people that are looking to, hike the whole system and get to Grindstone Mesa. There's mountain bikers. There's some equestrian users. And they're all accessing the trail system from the main trailhead right now. So to show a little map of the area, this is the whole trail system that includes, all the Forest Service trails to the south and to the west. And these are, trails that are they're outside the master plan boundaries, but they're all connected to that main trailhead at the lake. So that's the main point where people are, currently accessing the trails. And it's one of those things where if someone's going on a day hike, they're potentially parking for the whole day somewhere in the Grindstone area and then, hiking up and coming back. So to help manage access to the trail system, the Forest Service is currently looking at building a new trailhead down here in the south off, I think it's Mud Canyon Road. And that would alleviate some of the pressure from the main trailhead. And then they're also looking at a new trail connection east to west that would connect to that larger trail system. Another kind of opportunity that we've been looking at is to connect Grindstone to the rest of the village and create some kind of pathway between, downtown and some of these other recreational amenities and kind of the main site. So that would probably be looking at east-west trail that would connect to probably Carrizo Creek Road or Grindstone Canyon Road, and then kind of a north-south route to downtown, which would let people not necessarily they'd be able to bike or walk to the site instead of have to drive and park there. And then quickly just touch on some of the trail improvements on the site itself. One thing that we've been looking at is improvements to the Fisherman's Trail along the south bank, just making sure that that's accessible. And then also looking at the main service road along the north side of the lake and making sure that that's accessible for people that, may be in wheelchairs or might have mobility challenges, and making sure that they're able to access it. So that could involve paving portions of the road or just making sure it's more safe and accessible for those other users. Okay, and I'll hand it over to Will now to talk about water quality.
Thanks, James. Before I get into that, it seems like we might be having some issues with folks not being able to access the chat. Can you take a look at that while I run through these slides? Thank you. We're working on that, folks. I don't know quite why that's people are having a hard time getting into that. So water quality. Grindstone Reservoir holds approximately 500 million gallons of water, which makes up about 75% of the village's annual water use. The water is treated at the base of the dam, and it's pumped uphill to a couple of storage tanks from which it's distributed to the village. There has been some concern expressed by folks in the village about the impacts to the water quality of people swimming. Folks are worried about things like pollution from things like sunscreen. In response to that, the village has implemented an annual testing process to verify that the water quality is not impacted. They have not done the testing yet for this year, but at the end of last year when they tested it, they had no measurable impact from the activities that are happening in the lake. And the village has committed to keeping up this testing process as long as these uses are permitted at the lake. It looks like we may have chat up and running if folks want to run a test. So the biggest concern to water quality really comes down to the turbidity of the water. Turbidity is essentially the measure of the cloudiness of the water. So low turbidity means that the water is not very cloudy. High turbidity means that it's very cloudy. It's got a lot of particulate matter in it. So the problem is that as the turbidity in the lake increases, so does the cost of filtering that particulate matter out of the water. They have to filter it more. It costs the village more money. Increased turbidity also can have a negative effect on the fish population and and the other aquatic animals that contribute to a healthy fishery, things that the fish eat, things like that. So the primary contributors to turbidity are erosion and human activity. There are 10 drainages that feed into the reservoir, some of which are more erosive than others. You can see one of them in the middle photo here. Oh, good. I'm seeing chats come in. Very happy to see that. So what we're proposing to help reduce some of the erosion that comes into this, into the lake from these drainages is to make a series of interventions, check dams, which would be a pretty light duty intervention that may be higher up in the watershed, or maybe in a watershed that doesn't get really high volumes of water coming down it. In areas where there's a lot of erosion, there's big cuts, and we have high volumes of water coming down into the lake, we would propose something more like a gabion structure that would hold some of that would slow that water down, start to build that that drainage back up, and allow some of that particulate matter that's flowing with the water to slow down, drop out a solution, and then the water flowing into the lake would be cleaner. Another big contributor to high turbidity is human activity. It's us playing in the lake. You know, when people go out swimming in the lake bottom is really muddy. They churn up the mud as they walk through the water, and it makes the water cloudy. So one of the things that the village is doing right now to combat that to a certain degree is they're building up the primary swimming area, building up a beach on this primary swimming area. We're bringing in sand, excavating out some of the lake bottom, putting in sand instead of the muddy silt that's at the bottom of the lake. And what that'll do is the sand is a larger particle size, so it won't get as cloudy when people are walking through the sand when they're out there recreating. Another recommendation that we have to help with that is to harden the boat ramp, essentially pave the boat ramp in concrete. That's a recommendation that we're going to be including in our plan, and I see someone is asking that question right now, so that's good timing on that question. Thank you. Another issue that comes into play related to human activity and erosion into the lake is trampling of the lakeside vegetation. What you can see on the photo on the right is that there's a path starting to be worn through the vegetation area along the side of the lake. What happens when that vegetation gets trampled is the vegetation is holding the soil in place to a large degree. And when that vegetation gets trampled, there's nothing holding the soil in place. So when we get a big storm event and the water flows over the land, it's more likely to pick up some of that soil and wash it into the lake. The other issue with trampling lakeside vegetation, you know, one of the main activities at Grindstone is fishing. And a lot of the fish that we're fishing for, and a lot of the amphibians and smaller species of fish and bugs that those fish eat will either live in these areas of vegetation along the side of the lake, or they'll lay their eggs in it, or they'll live in it when they're young. So it's really important cover for those species to help maintain this healthy fishery. So our recommendations to kind of counteract that are to potentially establish something like vegetation protection areas along the lakeshore where we have really good stands of existing vegetation. Maybe we, put signs up or something and ask people not to walk through those areas to preserve that vegetation. We can reestablish vegetation in areas that have become degraded. And we can establish clear trails around the lakeside that show people where it's okay to go and to be. Establishing a clear trail network can go a long way toward alleviating what we see here, which is what we call social trails. So there we go. A lot of that kind of ties into what we were talking about. A lot of water recreation kind of ties into what we were talking about in terms of water quality. So the Whibbit that you see here has been a major draw for the lake, bringing a lot of new people in with their families. Obviously, it didn't open this year. I understand that the attendance at the lake this year was higher even without the Whibbit than it was last year, even with coronavirus and everything. So people are really being drawn to this lake for that water recreation. You can see the new dock over in the other photo where folks are fishing and enjoying themselves. Another thing we looked at is kind of maintenance and preservation of sort of the landscape around the lake. Currently, staffing levels seem to be sufficient to keep up with things like the daily maintenance, like cleaning the restrooms, making sure the trash is emptied, and enforcement of the village's rules for the users of the lake and keeping the public safe. As visitorship increases, obviously the village is going to need to have a mechanism in place to allow the staff to grow accordingly so that there's enough staff to keep up with all the folks there. Another thing I want to talk about, again, I want to touch on social trails. Here in the photo on the left, you can see, I think this is the slope going up from the lower parking lot to the restrooms. You can start to see how this would become really erosive in a big storm event. As water is focused onto this path that's being worn into the hillside, it's just going to cut this trail deeper and deeper and be a bigger and bigger scar. So it really does, these social trails really do start to affect the aesthetics of the place, which is part of why we all go there. And what social trails really point to is a need to develop a real clear and intuitive internal circulation pattern for visitors, so that when people come to the lake, they know this is the path to the restroom, this is how you get from your car to the lake. And that can be as simple as good intuitive trail design, some signage, things like that. Pretty easy interventions. And we've looked at some other ideas. What you see here in the picture on the right is a lot of people are coming out to the lakeside and they're bringing their pop-up shelters, putting out some chairs and kind of making a picnic of it and having a good time. We've also heard of folks kind of shimmying up the draws to try and get under some trees to get in some shade, just to kind of get out of the sun because it can be kind of relentless. So what we're recommending is identifying potential locations for some shade structures with some picnic tables around the lake, up out of the high water line, so that visitors have kind of a place for respite and relaxation as they're out at the lake. James touched on some accessibility improvements that we're recommending. Particularly on that north side of the lake, we want to suggest that we provide a firm, stable surface for folks that have mobility issues. so that they can go along that north road and really get into some of that good fishing, and also to provide some accessible fishing locations along that road where folks who may be in a wheelchair or who just have a hard time getting around can easily get lakeside and dip a line in the water and catch a fish. You see where I'm at. Oh yeah, and along with that goes improvement of the accessible parking. Another idea we had that we've kind of been developing is this idea of encouraging some entrepreneurship at the lake. And basically that would be to provide a mechanism for people who may see a need at the lake to put together a proposal and then start providing that service to visitors at the lake. So that could be everything from, running a parking shuttle, operating a zip line or something like that, some kind of attraction that the village doesn't have right now. Maybe there's a golf cart ferry helping folks from their cars to the lakeside, elderly folks, things like that. So that's really what we've been kind of focusing on in terms of sort of existing conditions and how can we attack some of these problems and provide some solutions. So with that, I'll hand it over to James, and I see things are flying in the chat, so that's good. We'll start taking a look at these and see if we can address them. Go ahead, James.
All right. Well, thanks, Will. And sorry that the chat wasn't working earlier. And we've had this has been the technical difficulty presentation, I guess, unfortunately, but hopefully it's working now. So for the kind of last segment of this meeting and workshop, we really wanted to hear from you all, and based on kind of what we've discussed and brought up already, want to know hear from you all about how we can make things better out at Grindstone, and also, what things we should prioritize and what your priorities might be. So we have a few poll questions, and hopefully this will work better than that first one. I think I had the wrong link in the chat initially, so this should work this time. And if not, we can go right to Q&A. But if you click that link, hopefully it'll work, and you can still text responses as well to the number there in at the bottom. But based on kind of the things that we covered, we wanted to see, among physical improvements, what would be your top 2 priorities. So I can go through them. One would just be, establishing a maximum parking capacity to limit the number of people that would visit and impacts. The second would be improving accessibility of the trails. Will covered that a little bit, and I talked about it too. Third, adding more lake amenities like shade structures, more trash receptacles, that kind of thing. Adding more water recreation activities. And then finally, let's see, what's our 5th one? Adding that boat ramp. So it looks like this is working better this time, getting some results here. That's good. So adding a boat ramp, it seems really popular. That's good. We definitely have been hearing about that. Okay, and establishing a maximum parking capacity. Okay. Excellent. So I'm glad this is working. We have 25 votes. And I guess if there's anything here that we want to talk about more, we're going to have some time for Q&A coming up. So this isn't the only way we want to hear from everyone. Okay. Well, it seems like the boat ramp and the parking capacity are the clear winners here. All right, well, we can revisit that. Wanted to move on to the next series of questions or priorities, which is really looking at some of the operational changes that could happen at Grindstone to address some of the issues that we brought up. So the first one is expanding or improving the existing concession services at the lake, and that could be food and drink or some of those other entrepreneurial opportunities that Will mentioned. The second option here is just increasing the number of staff and improving staff so there's more people available to provide services and maintain the site. Third would be more outdoor, just more programming in general of outdoor recreation activities, and that could include programming in those off-season months that I mentioned, more events, more things to bring people to the area. And then third, improving maintenance and overall conditions at the lake, which seems to be a popular answer here. And then finally, our fifth thing would be implementing a full-time reservation system to manage the capacity at the lake. And based on these initial results, it looks like expanding the overall maintenance and conditions of the lake is a priority for a lot of people here. And also, it looks like the full-time reservation system has some support as well. Okay. I want to move on because we only have about 13 minutes or so left. So, we covered a lot this evening, and there's probably things that we didn't touch on. So we have a open-ended discussion before we get into Q&A about, what are the other things you'd want to see the village prioritize? So this is should let you guys put in anything, like it's an open-ended question. And if you see something on the list, as people respond, you can upvote an answer too. So hopefully
and we're seeing a lot of recommendations coming into the chat. So
yeah, maybe
if you want to throw some of that in there and see if it gets upvoted, that would be fantastic.
Got some more staff. Okay. That's not you, Rodney, is it? Just kidding. Train connectivity. Okay, I don't think we've heard about the train connectivity and additional trailhead yet or before.
I think that might be supposed to say trail connectivity.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Well, definitely it seems like people support more staff for the Parks and Rec department to manage the site. Beer and wine garden, okay. Interesting. Well, okay. Well, do you think you want to, I guess we should move on to Q&A now. I think we're getting some good ideas here, but we do want to make sure we have time to answer questions and get to what people have been putting into the chat. And we have, 10 minutes or so left. So I guess if we can go down the list and see if there's any questions we haven't been able to answer as we've been going along here. Let's see. Wow, there's been a lot of stuff in the chat, which is great. Okay. So I think we answered the question about the boat ramp. There are plans to potentially look at, a boat ramp and hardening that. There's a question here about, it sounds like water quality is only checked once a year. Is that true? I think the community will eventually request that number be increased. So I don't know if maybe that's a question for Eric, if you want to say anything more about that and the water quality at the reservoir.
Sure, James. I'm Eric Boyd. I'm the Water Resource Director. So we're always monitoring the water that's going into the treatment plant. That's part of the process. And the main thing that we watch for is the turbidity. That's how a lot of organisms find their way through treatment water processes. So that's always monitored all the time as the filters are running. And I believe at a minimum, we're testing for other contaminants once a year just to see accumulation over time.
Cool, thanks, Eric. And this might be a related question, but does the forest clearing project add to erosion? And I'm not sure if that's a specific project or just forest clearing in general. So that might be a question that you might be able to answer too, Eric.
There might be some increased erosion right off the bat, but the forest thinning should increase the amount of understory vegetation, which is going to reduce the amount of bare soil. So there should be more grasses, and that would prevent erosion in those areas.
Okay, cool, thank you. Looks like we have some comments after that about not to forget other trail users, trail runners. I think, yeah, that's important to remember. And I'm sorry I didn't mention that when I was doing the overview of the trails. We have another comment about no Whibbit. I guess I'm not sure. I guess that's a more controversial thing. We have a question. Did you just mention adding a zip line at Grindstone? Will, do you want to say more about that?
You know, that was just an example of something that an entrepreneur could potentially operate. You know, kind of off the cuff. There's no plans currently to build a zip line at Grindstone. It was just an example of something that could be done.
Cool. Okay. And then it looks like, yeah, we have a lot of comments. I'll read a few. Please keep it natural. No loud music from the snack bar area. Lots of bird life to be preserved. Make a swim area for kids comparable to the Carlsbad Beach area. And Carlsbad Beach is really nice. And that might actually be something that we could look at as a precedent in some ways. Let's see.
Better accessibility for fishermen on the south side. So yeah, okay. So parking lots. Okay, that's a good suggestion. So the suggestion is, I'm sorry, I just realized you're not all reading the same thing I'm reading. It says the north side parking has been pretty well taken up with the swimmers, etc. We really need better accessibility for fishermen on the south side parking lot so we can drive around there in a short walk to additional docks. Keep the SR fishermen in mind. We can't walk from the disc golf parking lot. Okay. Yeah, we can. We'll take a look at the area and see if there's potential for adding an accessible parking area there to provide better access to the to that south side fisherman's trail.
Yeah. Okay, I'm looking for more questions to make sure we get to those. There's a lot of comments here, and I just want to point out we'll be sharing this presentation online. And if, like I said earlier, if there's questions or comments that we're not able to get to this evening, we'll make sure that all gets posted and we'll follow up with everyone.
Okay, I've got a question here. Are there plans for toss no moss pickup by the community? Trash is really a problem, including fishing lines and hooks. Rodney, are there any plans for that kind of activity that you're aware of?
So the Parks and Recreation Department with our Keep New Mexico Beautiful program hosts 2 major cleanups each year and has done so for the past 20 plus years. So to answer that, yes, this year with COVID, it's put a little bit of a damper on those community cleanup efforts. But we work with Adopt a Park members. We work with different community organizations throughout the year, and there, just this year alone, there has been multiple specific cleanups of the shoreline, as well as staff patrolling that area pretty heavily over the summer. But I mean, to answer that question, yes, that is a part of the maintenance plan for not only that lake, but the other lake and our parks.
Thank you, Rodney.
Thanks, Rodney.
I see another question here just about how all the improvements might be paid for. And Rodney, I don't know if you want to touch on that in terms of how Parks and Rec budget has worked and how you've paid for the improvements up to now.
So the Parks and Rec department is funded out of the general fund. These enterprises that are associated with the lake go a long way towards funding the general fund. Some of the operations that were specific to the lake, that funding was actually committed to go back to the Parks Department to support those improvements, as well as a portion was set aside to improve the watershed in that area. And so a few of the past projects that have been funded through the improvements of the WIBIT or from parking are items like the engineering for the beach, the construction and cost of the materials for the beach, the docks, the improvements to the concession stand, and then there'll some of the bank stabilization along the existing parking areas was funded from the watershed portion that was set aside. The fencing to kind of direct and control the pedestrian traffic was paid through that funding. Potential future funding for the recommendations out of this process could also be funded through that special fund. Some of other areas that we have been successful in receiving funding are from the local lodgers tax. And, there's always potential funding from the Economic Development Department from New Mexico for outdoor. They have a grant program that we hope to utilize recommendations and the master plan to receive funding from that as well.
All right. Well, thank you, Rodney. And yeah, there's a number of funding options, and I think any of the recommendations that are included in the plan would, be tied to those funding possibilities. So they're not just pie in the sky ideas. I see a few other comments and questions, I guess, about the parking and the capacity. And there was a question here about, shouldn't the number of parking spaces and capacity be set to what the lake can handle and the lake levels? And I guess that is a major consideration. And I think that is something we want to make sure we have a clear recommendation on in the plan. And I think I mentioned earlier that this season that capacity was set at about 300 vehicles from the reservation system, and that might be the right level, but we might have to potentially tweak that a little bit or have a different recommendation moving forward based on that natural capacity. All right, so it's already 7, and I can't believe we've had so many comments, which is awesome, and questions. But we only planned on an hour, so I just wanted to quickly wrap up and talk about kind of the next steps quickly. So just throwing up the project timeline again. We're in November. We're looking to have a follow-up meeting sometime in the next month or so to make sure that we're following with everyone who has attended this meeting, answer any remaining questions, and then share kind of our recommendations and the kind of final plan before it goes to be adopted next year. And so kind of the other ways to get involved moving forward, if you visit the village website or that story map that we shared earlier, there's a way to submit comments on the story map, comments and questions. And you can also email the project team at the email address here, which is just parksrec@ruidoso-nm.gov. And we'll make sure all those comments and questions are incorporated into the next presentation and that we answer any of them. And then, as I said, there'll be a future meeting, which we have to settle the date, but it'll hopefully be in the next month or so. So that's our presentation. And thank you everyone for participating. It was great to have hear all your comments and ideas. And I'm sorry we don't have more time to get into all of them, but thank you. I don't know if
Thank you, everyone. Rodney, did you, Rodney or Mr. Mayor, did either of y'all want to say anything before we adjourn?
No, I'm certainly good. I just appreciate everybody tuning in and all the comments. Really do.
Will, I would like to mention that I believe there will be additional opportunities and update of this information, correct?
That's correct. We are planning a follow-up public meeting, same format as this one. That's going to be probably early December. And if you monitor the project website and the village website, you should see a notification popping up for that when we get that finalized. Additionally, I think James touched on this, but just to kind of circle back, we have been recording this meeting, and we are copying and pasting all of the comments out of this meeting and saving them. And we will be developing a question and answer list on the site so people can see. If we haven't gotten to your question tonight, but it's in the chat, we'll get to it and we'll post it on that. And you can check that between the meetings. And then if you want to follow up on it, you can attend the next meeting and have another opportunity for input there.
definitely. All righty. Well, thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And I think with that, we'll adjourn.